Okay, my guest is Daniel Ortner. He's an attorney with the Pacific Legal Foundation. Daniel, thanks for joining me this afternoon.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks.
All right, Daniel, you have an op-ed piece in the San Antonio Express News.
That's right,
SA and Chick-fil-A shows why free speech matters. Talk a little bit about the situation in your column.
Sure. So San Antonio, the city council recently voted to exclude Chick-fil-A from having a restaurant at the city's airport, and they did so over the speech and religious beliefs and donations of the owner and the foundation of Chick-fil-A. The organization has given money to groups like the Salvation Army, which are charitable organizations that help children don't have Christmas presents, run soup kitchens, do all kinds of charitable work. But because the groups are Christian groups and have traditional understandings of issues like marriage as being between a man and a woman, the donation is enough to label Chick-fil-A as a bigoted organization in the eyes of San Antonio and to exclude them.
Now, this is a situation that's come up around the country in terms of individuals, groups who have donated to causes that support traditional marriage. And putting aside the free speech, the opponents of that position are particularly vicious, I would argue, and have a very fascistic orientation in that they will gain the names of anybody who's donated to these groups, right down to if they even gave like $100 or something.
Right.
They then publicize those names and they put them, these people, you could become blackballed. You can lose your career, you can lose your livelihood, you can lose your career. You have your name sullied for the rest of your life. I mean, they can literally destroy someone because of their political involvement or their position, which these people obviously don't agree with. And, while I suppose technically they have a right to do this, or maybe you may want to comment otherwise, it's really an ugly situation when you have someone engaging in that kind of opposition rather than simply saying, look, we don't agree with these people and we'll debate them, but they have a right to their opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. It's really ugly, and it's contrary to the foundations of free speech in this nation, where there's the understanding that we can disagree very strongly with one another on very difficult issues, but we give room for people to express their viewpoint. And most importantly, we don't use the force of government to censor people. And that's what's happening here is that the city of San Antonio, a government entity, is saying, if you do not think the way we want you to think, if you do not give donations to the people we want you to give donations to, if you step out of the approved perspective that we're forcing upon you, then we are going to punish you. Then you're not going to be able to contract with us. You're going to be excluded from the public square. And so when the force of government is used to do that, that is a violation of the First Amendment.
Well, now this is where, it becomes an issue because we're talking about a public municipality. Right. And just to give another example of this sort of thing, I personally really don't like the fact that some businesses are involved with boycotting the state of Israel because I support Israel, and I personally would not patronize those businesses. My mother, a great source, right, unimpeachable, told me about a certain business that is boycotting Israel, and I'm not going to mention the name of the business because again, it's my mother, and I can't confirm it, but I personally will not do business with them because of that.
Right.
But I'm not about to go on a jihad against them. I'm not going to, declare that they should be banned from the public square, that they have no right and all. It's more just I'm going to apply my own pressure. I may even mention it to friends and associates.
Right.
But that's different than what we're talking about here. We're talking about, really a banning. Now, your issue from a legal standpoint, being a lawyer, is that the city of San Antonio is acting inappropriately by boycotting Chick-fil-A at the airport.
Yeah,
what is the grounds for that, legally speaking?
I'd say that Chick-fil-A would have several grounds. The first, all under the First Amendment, but first of all, being a free speech claim. The idea is that the government cannot set what is called unconstitutional conditions on contracting or working with the government. So they can't say, if you want to contract with us, you have to think a certain way, you have to speak a certain way, or you cannot think or speak a certain way. So that's the doctrine of unconstitutional conditions is what it's called. I think the second ground would be a free exercise challenge, saying this is retaliation against us for our religious beliefs, this is religious discrimination, and you can't do this. And then the third ground might be the Establishment Clause under the First Amendment, which is to say you are favoring a not non-religion over religion in this case because you are targeting us because of our religious beliefs. So that's kind of related to the free exercise claims. I think all three of those would be viable claims if Chick-fil-A were to bring them.
Now, to play, to work the other side here for a second, it occurs to me that, in a way, the city of San Antonio does have some latitude with regard to not putting up commercials or not allowing certain businesses that might violate some real, fundamental elements of what's accepted societally, such as, a Nazi group or, a white supremacist group or somebody that, something that really is not consonant with our culture. So I guess that there's a certain amount of subjective opinion here. I mean, Chick-fil-A is hardly that. To oppose gay marriage, they're not telling anyone else they can't have a gay marriage. They're simply saying, we personally oppose it. They're not, it's not like they're enforcing anything. I mean, so I suppose my question to you, Daniel, is where do you draw the line legally and societally on these matters?
Sure. So the city can take into account a couple of things. First of all, it can outlaw discrimination, which there's no accusation here that Chick-fil-A has discriminated, has turned away a gay customer or fired an employee for being gay. So it can absolutely outlaw discrimination in the restaurant. Mm-hmm. It also can regulate a little more extensively the actual store of Chick-fil-A or whatever restaurant that is being run in the government space. So if Chick-fil-A were conveying certain messages in their restaurant, for instance, there might be a little more latitude for the government to say, well, in the space that we are leasing to you, you're somewhat limited in what you can say. But what it cannot do is go to the private views of a company not related to the contract with the government and say, well, because of your private speech outside of this contract, we're not going to contract with you. And that's true no matter what the speech is. As long as it's lawful, protected, constitutionally allowed speech, as long as that is the case, it's not unlawful in some way, it's not inciting violence, it's not actually something that violates the Constitution in and of itself or is not protected, they can't punish them for their private speech. The government is not allowed to decide what is orthodox in matters of speech or matters of religion, mm-hmm. even things that are considered hateful or things that we disagree with. There's room for that speech, and that's been the foundational understanding of speech for the past half century at least.
Right, and I think that legally, certainly, but also societally, we're better off leaning on the side of free speech, even if we dislike and despise that which is being said. And as you pointed out, Chick-fil-A is not engaging in any illegal activity, and they're not telling a gay couple they can't come in and buy a chicken sandwich. I mean, they're not asking people at the door whether they're gay. I mean, it's an open venue, open to the public, and as such, everyone is held to the same standards. They may have a dress code, which is fine as long as they're not discriminating. Everybody has to observe it. Right. They're not saying you have to do this and you can't do that. So, in the broad sense, I think you're on solid legal ground, and that they're not violating any community standards by selling chicken sandwiches at the airport. Now, I suppose in an actual sense, if the groups that are trying to get them banned, a response to that might be that groups that don't like what they're doing can publish their names and boycott them. Right? I mean, it's just like I boycott BDS people. I mean,
that's right. And that's the way the market is supposed to work is everyone, the free market works where people speak out, people have their opinions, you can disagree with them, you can engage in private boycotts. That's all protected under the First Amendment as well. But what you cannot do is use the government as a mechanism of force. to say, well, we disagree with you, therefore we're going to use the government. And the BDSM example, boycott, divestment, sanctions movement is actually an interesting example because a district court in Texas just yesterday struck down the Texas's boycott, divestment law as violating the First Amendment, where they said, we, the state, will not contract with anyone who supports the boycott, divestment movement. And that was actually also struck down on the First Amendment grounds just yesterday. And so it's a very similar example where San Antonio is saying, well, we will not contract with you if you give donations to groups like the Salvation Army, or you speak out against gay marriage or in favor of traditional understanding of marriage. It's the exact same principle. The government cannot be an arbiter of what speech is right and say, well, if we disagree with you, we are not going to allow you to contract with us. We're not going to allow you to exercise your rights in society. We're not going to treat you equally. So there's a fundamental principle there that the government has to be a neutral party with regard to the viewpoint of other groups in society.
And I suppose it's a bit of a tit for tat, given that the BDS movement is probably intersectional with the pro-gay movement. They kind of all come under the same umbrella, so they got one success and one failure. But either way, they shouldn't be involved in using our system, especially in public venues, to ban people who disagree with them. Yep.
This can be weaponized in either direction. The progressive groups like this right now, because they can use it against groups like Chick-fil-A. But if it gets turned against them, it's used by conservative states to target the boycott, divestment of Israel. Either direction, whether it's a conservative state using it in that way against a progressive cause or vice versa, it is foundationally flawed and contrary to the First Amendment. It comes from this almost religious-like zeal that people are so convinced that they are absolutely right on these issues that there's no room for disagreement, no room for those who don't see exactly eye to eye with them to have a space. And that is really dangerous. And it's also this idea that speech is an act of violence against others. If a gay person sees a Chick-fil-A sign, that they're going to be so mortally, deeply offended that it's going to cause harm to them. And I think that the Constitution envisions a people that are robust, that are able to engage in dialogue. The Founding Fathers were not cowards, as the Supreme Court has said. They saw a value in robust exchange of ideas without censorship and without saying, well, we are going to shut off things that we find offensive or disagree with.
No, I think that you're bringing up a broader question here, which is, and it goes to what's going on at most American campuses today, most colleges, in that if you express an unpopular opinion, you are violating someone else's safe space, as if that's what colleges, and if they want a safe space, they should go back to their parents' house.
It's a very dangerous way of thinking. It's one that you see a lot more commonly in Europe right now, where if you offend someone, that speech that is offensive can be you can be criminally penalized for that. There's a case in the United Kingdom of a journalist being investigated for misgendering someone, and there's potential criminal penalties attached to that if you choose not to label someone with the pronoun that they prefer for their own identity. Then that is a criminal offense because you're offending them. You're not recognizing their dignity, and that idea that offense is violence, or things that are not nice are violent and need to be punished, is a really dangerous slope to be down.
It's outright, it's outright tyranny. All right, my guest is Daniel Ortner. He's an attorney with the Pacific Legal Foundation. Yeah, look, I would point out to my liberal viewers and listeners, to the degree I have any, that this is it's a sword that cuts both ways. If we're going to take away freedom of speech and we're going to criminalize opinion that you may not like, it's the most blatant manifestation of tyranny that we can imagine. It is complete micro-control over every single individual and what they say and don't say. And I suppose it's the ultimate expression of the whole left-wing enterprise anyways, because that's public ownership, control over everything that's conveyed in terms of communication. So, you guys are on the cutting edge of opposing this. It's a national phenomenon, isn't it? What else is going on around the country? This is like something that's in a way it's it's almost like a cultural purge, if you will, of our society, and it's a using of the legal apparatus of government to do it.
Right. I think you see this in, like you mentioned, the university campus setting. I think what's going on is there's just people have really forgotten why free speech really matters. That it matters because it allows us to dialogue and reason and listen to one another and come to a consensus and reach compromise. And when there's such a visceral reaction, anytime someone disagrees with you, like anytime someone says something you disagree with, you want to censor them, you want to shut them up. There's never going to be room for dialogue or compromise or reaching any kind of common ground, because it's all a battleground. Everything's a fight. Every word, is a cause for offense. And when you're in that situation, there's no room to actually, in good faith, to dialogue with people you disagree with. And the First Amendment creates a culture and a society where we're able to disagree with one another respectfully. We're able to very passionately sometimes disagree and differ, but come to and find common ground. And that is being eroded, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, why bother go to college if you can't have disagreement? I mean, why not just go to sensitivity training, which is probably what they're turning the colleges into anyways? Indoctrination camps. I mean, if you're not going to have reasonable disagreement, then there's nothing learned. I mean, in order to go out and actually, I mean, how can you have a law school that doesn't debate very controversial? That's what law school is. You know that. You're a lawyer. Right? Yep. I mean, isn't it like you go at an issue with both fists? You have to fight. I mean, that's a reflection of real life. I mean, if they're going to be living in some kind of a, hermetically sealed room somewhere where everything is controlled, then they're not going to learn anything. You don't develop any kind of, you don't develop a mind. You don't develop a character because, and you're not dealing in reality, because the fact of the matter is that, life is filled with all kinds of conflict. I mean, that's just existence. I mean, what the hell are they thinking? It's really...
What's really sad is that, in the 1960s, the students and the faculty were really pushing for freedom of speech. The administrators were resistant. They didn't want groups on campus speaking out. Now it's often the students and even the faculty that are calling for censorship. The students themselves are the ones shutting down speakers. They're the ones doing the boycotts, doing the acts of violent instigations against speakers on campuses. And so it's really sad to see the students be the instigators of this. They're the ones who used to be the champions of speech on campus, and now the mentality is shifted to where speech I disagree with is no longer something I want to hear, but differ or disagree with. It's something that's offensive that needs to be shut down. It's hateful, and I can't deal with it.
And the campus and the administration is siding with these people. I don't know if you saw this interview with Heather McDonald, who is she's a writer and author, a political scientist, who did an article about the situation at Yale, and she's a graduate of Yale, where this professor and his wife, who's also a professor, they tweeted something, or they sent out an article that some of the young students on the campus didn't agree with, and there was like a riot, and they caught on video this girl screaming at this guy, "You effing bastard! How could you do this?" And it almost sounded like, it reminded me of like the Salem witch trials, when these girls are like, witch, and they're going out of their minds. And the result of the thing is bad enough that, first of all, as a student talking to a professor like that, she should have been suspended at least, if not expelled. That's probably what it might have happened in the old days. But now the campus fired the professor and his wife.
Right.
And we don't know who these young students who did this. No one even knows who they are. So it's bad enough that you have students engaging in this kind of behavior, shutting somebody down like that, and you're violating our safe space. But the administration is the problem. I mean, they've endorsed it, basically.
Right. The sad is they don't. When let's say there's a speaker and there are protesters that shut it down, where are the police? Where are the administrators to say, no, you can't do that kind of protest. You can't shut down another speaker. You have the right to protest. You have the right to speak out, but you can't do it by disrupting the speech of others. You can't.
That's right.
Exercise your right at the expense of other people's rights. Ultimately,
and harassing Ben Shapiro.
Really say that.
I mean, Ben Shapiro is about as controversial as milquetoast. He's not like some hot, radical, and to have him shut down with riots and having people like breaking down walls over it. I mean, anyway, Daniel, what else are you working on over there?
We do a lot of really involved with property rights is kind of our bread and butter. We do economic liberty, obviously free speech. We fight the administrative state, the outgrowth of the administrative state.
Good.
So really, generally, just challenging the government, helping individuals to sue the government and ultimately prevail in their battle against the government. That's what PLF's all about.
Excellent. And Daniel, let my listeners and viewers know how they can reach you and your organization and get more information.
Sure. PacificLegal.org is our website. We have articles and blog posts about all our recent cases, including a link to the op-ed that I published in the San Antonio Express News about the Chick-fil-A controversy. We have information about all of our cases, all our Supreme Court victories. We've been up to the Supreme Court 11 times at the Supreme Court.
Incredible.
We have an unmatched record, really, of victory at the Supreme Court. So you can come there and learn about us and join our movement.
Excellent. Daniel Ortner, I want to thank you very much for joining me. Please stay in touch and keep us posted from time to time.
Will do.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right.
Thanks.
Take care.
You too.